Nuclear policy, technological evolution, and strategic deterrence.
China's nuclear policy is that it will not be the first to use nuclear weapons against any country or region. China's original number of intercontinental missiles was far less than that of the United States and Russia. The main models are the Dongfeng 5, Dongfeng 31, Dongfeng 41, and the submarine-launched JL Julang series of intercontinental ballistic missiles. These missiles are designed for nuclear counterattack immediately according to established plans after our side receives early warning of a nuclear attack. They have low requirements for intelligence on the location of the enemy's nuclear strike and focus more on the ability to warn against the enemy's launch of nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union had nuclear arsenals with tens of thousands of warheads. At its peak, the Soviet Union had approximately 40 nuclear warheads, and the United States was not far behind, with only slightly fewer than the Soviet Union. The nuclear doctrine of both sides at that time was nuclear victory. They believed that their nuclear weapons were not capable of destroying humanity, let alone the nations of both sides. The actual purpose was to disable the opponent's nuclear war, fighting capability, and military potential. In this context, great emphasis was placed on launching the first, second, and even multiple rounds of nuclear counterattacks against the enemy after suffering a nuclear strike. The technology of intercontinental missiles has been evolving, especially in terms of materials and propellants. For a long time during the Cold War, intercontinental missiles were large in size and weight. Land-based intercontinental missiles could only be launched from silos, which were the primary targets of the enemy's first nuclear strike and lacked nuclear counterattack capability. At that time, the nuclear counterattack capability mainly relied on ballistic missile nuclear submarines. However, the cost of nuclear submarines is extremely high. Even during the Cold War, the cost of the U.S. Ohio-class ballistic missile nuclear submarine was much higher than that of the U.S. Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier of the same period. The cost of Soviet ballistic missile nuclear submarines, which were required to operate under the Arctic Ocean, was even higher. Compared with the huge nuclear arsenals of the United States and the Soviet Union, the number of ballistic missile nuclear submarines available for nuclear counterattacks was negligible, and they were unable to carry out multiple rounds of nuclear counterattacks. In the 1980s, with the progress of missile technology, especially the advancement of aerospace materials and propellants, it became possible to miniaturize intercontinental missiles, which could then be deployed on heavy trucks for mobile launch. Compared with the expensive cost of nuclear submarines, the cost of heavy trucks is negligible. Therefore, starting from the 1980s, both the United States and the Soviet Union began to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles based on heavy trucks as carriers for rapid nuclear counterattacks. The Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile for land-based nuclear counterattacks using heavy trucks is the famous Topol intercontinental ballistic missile. In fact, when the Soviet Union disintegrated, this missile had just entered service. The large-scale deployment of the Topol intercontinental missile did not happen until the Russian Federation, especially after Putin came to power. Russia widely equipped the Topol intercontinental missile. At that time, the Soviet Union was inferior to Western countries in terms of missile materials, propellants, and truck suspension system technology. The TEL intercontinental missile launch vehicle did not take nuclear shockwaves into account and was easily disabled by shockwaves in a nuclear war. The Soviet Union adopted the approach of quantity makes up for quality. If I build enough, I won't be afraid of your nuclear strikes. The nuclear counterattack intercontinental ballistic missile, developed by the United States during the same period, is the famous Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile. We can't help but marvel that the Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile weighs less than 17 tons and has a range of 11 kilometers. In contrast, China's Dongfeng 26 medium-range ballistic missile, which has a similar tonnage and size, has a range of only 4 kilometers. China's original Dongfang 31A, which was designed to achieve a payload and range similar to those of the Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile, weighs more than 40 tons. But in fact, the real value of the Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile lies in its rapid nuclear counterattack capability. The carrier of the Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile is the Hardened Mobile Launcher, HML, developed by Boeing Goodyear. This vehicle is particularly low profile. When the Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile is launched, the anchor of the missile trailer firmly attaches the trailer to the ground, enabling it to withstand an overpressure of 207 kPa, the shockwave from a 100-ton TNT equivalent nuclear explosion 800 meters away, and the shockwave from a 100-ton TNT equivalent nuclear explosion 2 kilometers away. At the same time, it only takes 15 minutes from preparation to launch. Therefore, the greatest value of the Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile is that even if the positioning intelligence is very accurate, it has extremely strong survivability, thus enabling nuclear counterattacks. The United States originally planned to purchase 500 such missile launch vehicles to deploy Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missiles. However, with the end of the Cold War and the further deepening of nuclear disarmament between the United States and Russia, a large number of nuclear weapons of both sides were reduced, and the existing nuclear warheads no longer supported the original nuclear war doctrines of both sides. As a result, the Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile and its launch vehicle were shelved. But the idea of the Midgetman intercontinental ballistic missile and its launch vehicle is very worthy of China's reference. China originally had 4 types of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Among them, the Dongfang 5 intercontinental ballistic missile uses liquid fuel and weighs more than 100 tons, so it can only be launched from fixed silos and is a target of the enemy's first nuclear strike. The second type is the Dongfeng 31 with road mobility capability. Its development began in the 1980s. Due to the limitations of technology at that time in terms of missile materials and propellants, its range is only 80 kilometers, which can only reach Moscow but not the US mainland. After entering the 21st century, although it has been improved many times to develop the Dongfeng 31A and Dongfeng 31AG with a range capable of reaching the US mainland, the Dongfeng 31 series missiles themselves weigh more than 40 tons, resulting in poor road mobility and low survivability after a nuclear strike. China's current international environment does not support it having tens of thousands of nuclear warheads like the Soviet Union during the Cold War to rely on quantity for victory. The third type of intercontinental ballistic missile, the Dongfeng 41, has the capability to carry multiple warheads and reach the US mainland compared to the Dongfeng 31. However, the Dongfeng 41 is heavier and larger in size than the Dongfeng 31, with even worse road mobility and survivability. In the future, the Dongfeng 41 will mainly be converted to fixed silo launch. The JL-2 among the submarine-launched JL series of intercontinental ballistic missiles has a range of only 80 kilometers. To strike the US mainland, it needs to sail out of the second island chain, and its effective nuclear counterattack capability in wartime is questionable. The JL-3 intercontinental ballistic missile, which can strike the US mainland from China's Bastion Sea areas, is currently only in service on one Type 94 nuclear submarine after the 418 modification. It is not easy to increase the number of ballistic missile nuclear submarines in the short term. Therefore, to improve the rapid nuclear counterattack capability in the short term, an intercontinental ballistic missile similar to the Midgetman is very important for China. The newly exposed Chinese land-based intercontinental ballistic missile system has a 6-axle launch vehicle, the same as that of the Dongfeng 26 medium-range ballistic missile. Compared with the 8-axle launch vehicles of the Dongfeng 31 and Dongfeng 41, it is much smaller. The more axles a truck has, the stronger its load, bearing capacity, and the heavier the missile it carries. The Dongfeng 26 is a ballistic missile weighing about 20 tons. The new rapid counterattack intercontinental missile should have a similar weight to the Dongfeng 26, also around 20 tons. Moreover, it is obvious that the suspension of this launch vehicle is height adjustable. When moving, the chassis is raised to enhance off-road and mobility capabilities. When launching the intercontinental missile, the chassis is lowered to improve the ability to resist nuclear shockwaves. The technical level of the new Rapid Counterattack Intercontinental Missile is roughly on par with that of the Midgetman Intercontinental Missile. Of course, in terms of the ability of the launch vehicle to resist nuclear explosion shockwaves, it may be inferior to the Midgetman's launch vehicle back then. However, by the time the Midgetman Intercontinental Missile was shelved, its launch vehicle had not been fully developed. Moreover, the Midgetman Intercontinental Missile was born at a time when the two major powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, each had more than 0 nuclear weapons, and they could launch multiple rounds of nuclear strikes to disable each other's nuclear forces. But now, both Russia and the United States have significantly reduced their nuclear warheads compared to the Cold War period. The United States now has approximately 50 nuclear warheads, and Russia has about 60. Therefore, a slightly lower ability to resist nuclear explosion shockwaves is relatively less of a problem. Under such circumstances, the difficulty in developing its chassis is much lower than that of the Midgetman Intercontinental Missile's chassis, enabling China to quickly form a rapid nuclear counterattack capability. With this missile deployed, even if the enemy has very accurate positioning intelligence, the Rapid Counterattack Intercontinental Missile System has strong survivability, allowing for nuclear counterattacks. This will greatly make up for the shortage in the number of China's ballistic missile nuclear submarines. Moreover, the current international political situation is not as stable as before. In recent years, many national leaders who have come to power are not as politically savvy as those during the Cold War. Therefore, the probability of war breaking out has greatly increased. However, with the commissioning of China's Rapid Counterattack Intercontinental Missile, it will greatly reduce the determination of unfriendly countries to launch a nuclear strike against China.